What's good, YouTube? We got the 8 longest prison sentences ever. But before we get into the video, if you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe because it's free. Don't be intimidated. It's free. Let's go.
Convicts. This is a harsh reality, as they have been given life sentences without the possibility of parole, making them the longest-serving inmates in the history of the penal system. Convicts can receive incredibly long prison sentences for a variety of reasons. Some possible reasons include the severity of the crime committed, the number of victims involved, the level of planning and premeditation involved, and the defendant's prior criminal history. Here are 8 insanely longest prison sentences ever. Chamoy Tipyaso. Chamoy Tipayaso is a former employee of Thailand's Petroleum Authority. She is infamous for receiving the world's longest prison sentence of 141,078 years for her role in a pyramid scheme that defrauded over 16,000 Thais and was estimated to be longest prison sentences ever. Chamoy Tipyaso. Chamoy Tipayaso is a former employee of Thailand's Petroleum Authority. She is infamous for receiving the world's longest prison sentence of 141,078 years for her role in a pyramid scheme that defrauded over 16,000 Thais and was estimated.
At that point, the death penalty. You ain't getting out anyway, so.
To be worth between $200 million and $301 million. Tipayaso established the My Chamoy Fund, a chit fund disguised to look like an oil share with high returns in the late 1960s. Thanks to Tipayaso's connections with the Air Force and Petroleum Authority, the fund survived for a remarkably long time. Her military connections were a significant source of political and commercial influence, and the scheme appeared legitimate due to military backing. 16,231 people were victims of the scam. The scheme persisted until the mid-1980s. There were calls for the government to bail out the banks and the chit funds because the fund had many politically influential investors from the military and even the royal household. The May Chamoy Fund was closed after private conversations with King Bhumibol Adulyadej, during which Chamoy Tipayaso was detained. Her trial was not carried out until after the losses for the involved military and royal personnel had been recovered. She was held in secret by the Air Force for several days. On July 27, 1989, a jury found Tipayaso and 7 other defendants guilty of corporate fraud. Although Thai law at the time stipulated that the maximum sentence that could be served for fraud was 20 years, she was nonetheless given a sentence of 141,078 years in prison.
Bro, at that point, just take me out. I wouldn't be able to do it. God,
or life in prison. However, she completed only about 8 years of the sentence. Jamal Zugum. The 2004 Madrid train bombings occurred on March 11, 2004, when a series of coordinated bombings occurred on 4 commuter trains in Madrid, Spain.
I want to know what psychologically drives people to do stuff like this. Why would you bomb a train? What did the people on that train do to you? That's crazy. He deserved to go under the jail.
The bombings killed 191 people and injured around 2,000 others. The bombings were the deadliest terrorist attack in Spanish history. The bombings were carried out by a group of Islamist extremists who were inspired by Al-Qaeda. The attacks prompted widespread condemnation and led to changes in Spain's anti-terror laws. The bombings also had a significant impact on the Spanish general election that was held 3 days later, which resulted in the defeat of the ruling party that had supported the Iraq War. Jamal Zugum was one of the individuals convicted of involvement in the 2004 Madrid train bombings. He was arrested several days after the bombings and was later charged with 191 counts of murder and 1,755 counts of attempted murder, as well as belonging to a terrorist organization. Zugam was found to have been in possession of a mobile phone that had been used to trigger the bombs, and phone records showed that he had been in contact with other members of the group that carried out the bombings. He was also found to have had links to an al-Qaeda cell based in Spain. Zugam and several others were convicted of the attacks in 2007 and were given multiple life sentences. Jamal Zugam was sentenced to 42,922 years in prison for his role in the 2004 Madrid train bombings. However, under Spanish law, the maximum prison sentence that can be served is 40 years. So, Zugam and other convicts will do 40 years in prison.
What? Oh no. That's it? So you telling me he took out 191 people and only served 40 years?
Several other individuals were also convicted in connection to the Madrid train bombings. A total of 29 people were convicted for their involvement in the attacks, and several others were acquitted. The group, which was led by an Egyptian man named Sarhane Abdelmaji, had connections to an al-Qaeda cell based in Spain and had been planning the bombings for months. Another convict, Othman El Nyawi, was sentenced to 42,924 years in prison. Emilio Suarez Trashora was given 34,715 years of imprisonment. El Nyawi is scheduled to be released on March 19, 2044. Trashoras and Zugam will be released 17 days before El Nyawi. Trashoras will be 67 years old, Zugam will be 71, and El Nyawi will be 69. It is the longest non-life sentence ever handed down in the European Union. Terry Nichols. Terry Nichols is an American domestic terrorist who was convicted for his role in the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. The bombing, which was carried out by Nichols and his accomplice Timothy McVeigh, killed 168 people and injured over 600 others. It is considered to be one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in American history. The Oklahoma City bombing was a terrorist attack that occurred on April 19, 1995, when a truck bomb was detonated outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The bombing killed 168 people and injured over 600 others, making it the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in American history at the time. The bomb was made of a mixture of ammonium nitrate and fuel oil and was placed in a rental truck parked in front of the building. The explosion destroyed a large portion of the building and caused significant damage to other nearby structures. The attack targeted the Murrah Building, which housed several federal agencies, including the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The bombing was planned and carried out by Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, who were motivated by their anger and resentment towards the federal government.
Tell me they served more than 40 years. Please tell me they served more than 40 years. Cause that's 168 plus injuring over 600 more.
Particularly the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, for the events that occurred in Waco, Texas. McVeigh was arrested a few hours after the bombing and was later convicted and sentenced to death for his role in the attack. Nichols was arrested a few days later and was convicted of conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction and 8 counts of involuntary manslaughter for the deaths of federal law enforcement.
See, he got sentenced to death. I think he should suffer. He really should suffer. That's crazy. Very crazy.
Personnel. The Oklahoma City bombing profoundly impacted the nation, leading to increased security measures and a reevaluation of anti-terrorism policies. It also prompted the creation of the Federal Emergency Management Agency's National Urban Search and Rescue Response System, which coordinates the response of search and rescue teams in the event of a disaster. In 1997, Nichols was given 161 life sentences by Oklahoma State Court on 161 counts of first-degree murder and 9,300 years of imprisonment, without the possibility of parole for aiding fellow ex-soldier McVeigh in conducting the attack. This set a record for the most consecutive life sentences ever given to a single individual. Due to such a large number of life sentences, adding no parole possibility, it can also be declared the longest officially confirmed sentence ever handed in the world. Nichols' case was appealed multiple times, but his convictions and sentences were upheld. He currently serves numerous life sentences in a federal prison in the United States. It is worth noting that Timothy McVeigh, who was also convicted for the bombing, was sentenced to death and was executed in 2001. Moses Sithole, also known as the ABC Killer and the South African Strangler, was a South African serial killer and rapist who was active in the mid-1990s. He is believed to have killed at least 38 young and unemployed women between 1994 and 1995.
What you got against women? Huh? Did it get to you? Yeah. Did it got to you, then? He did.
Sithole was born in 1964 in the town of Vosloorus in South Africa and had a troubled childhood. He was convicted of sexual assault in the 1980s and served time in prison. After his release, he began his killing spree, targeting unemployed women and luring them with the promise of work at a modeling agency, job placement agency, or even charity work. He would then abuse, murder, and sometimes mutilate his victims, who were found in shallow graves or dumped in open fields. He began his killing spree in Atteridgeville, a suburb of Pretoria, before moving on to Boksburg in Cleveland, thus the name ABC Murders. Sithole was finally arrested in November 1995 and was subsequently charged and convicted of 38 counts of murder, 40 counts of rape, and 6 counts of kidnapping. He was sentenced to multiple life sentences in prison, with the judge stating that he should never be released. He is currently serving his sentence in a maximum security prison in South Africa. The case of Moses Sithole was one of the most high-profile and shocking in South Africa's history, and it caused a great deal of public outrage, especially as most of his victims were from poor and working-class backgrounds. The case prompted changes in the country's criminal justice system and increased awareness of violence against women. Moses Sithole's trial for the ABC murders began in 1997, and it was one of the most high-profile criminal trials in South Africa's history. He was charged with 38 counts of murder, 40 counts of rape, and 6 counts of kidnapping. During the trial, Sithole pleaded not guilty to all the charges. Still, the prosecution presented a large amount of evidence against him, including DNA evidence linking him to several of the victims, as well as witness testimony and other forensic evidence. The trial lasted for several months and attracted a great deal of media attention. Sithole's defense team argued that he was mentally ill and, therefore, not responsible for his actions.
You tried it. You tried it. He ain't mentally ill. It's just psycho.
The prosecution argued that he was fully aware of what he was doing and was in control of his actions. In December 1997, the trial ended, and the jury found Sithole guilty on all counts. The judge subsequently sentenced him to multiple life sentences in prison, with the judge stating that he should never be released. He was given 2,410 years of imprisonment. Sithole's sentence was widely seen as a just punishment for his horrific crimes. The judge's decision to impose multiple life sentences, with no possibility of parole, reflected the gravity of his actions and the need to protect society from him. James Holmes. The 2012 Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooting was a mass shooting that occurred on July 20, 2012, in Aurora, Colorado, United States. The shooter, James Holmes, entered a movie theater during a screening of The Dark Knight Rises and began
Bro, he looks suspect. Bro, looks suspect. Look like something he'll
killing
do.
12 people and injuring 70 others. The shooting occurred at the Century 16 movie theater in the Aurora Town Center Mall. Holmes entered the theater through an emergency exit door and began shooting with multiple firearms, including a Smith & Wesson M and P-15 semi-automatic rifle, a Remington 870 shotgun, and a Glock 22 handgun. He was wearing a ballistic helmet, a ballistic vest, leggings, a throat protector, a groin protector, and a gas mask. The shooting lasted for several minutes, and many of the victims were hit multiple times. The police arrived at the scene within minutes, and Holmes was arrested outside the theater without incident. In the aftermath of the shooting, the victims and their families were provided with support and assistance from a variety of organizations. The community of Aurora and the surrounding area also came together to provide support and service to those affected by the shooting. Holmes was charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder and attempted murder. His trial began in April 2015, and in August of that year, he was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. During the trial, the prosecution presented significant evidence against Holmes, including eyewitness testimony, physical evidence, and Holmes's own statements to the police. The prosecution argued that Holmes had planned the attack for months and had a detailed understanding of the weapons and explosives he used. Holmes's defense team claimed that he was suffering from a severe mental illness at the time of the shooting, and they attempted to have him found not guilty by reason of insanity. They presented expert witnesses who testified that Holmes had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and was in the grip of a psychotic episode at the time of the shooting. However, the prosecution argued that Holmes was aware of what he was doing at the time of the shooting and that he had not been legally insane. They also presented evidence that he had researched other mass shootings and had taken steps to conceal his plans, such as booby-trapping his apartment. The trial lasted for several months, with both the prosecution and defense calling numerous witnesses and presenting evidence. In August 2015, the jury found Holmes guilty on all counts, and the following month, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He was given 12 life sentences without parole, plus 3,318 years of imprisonment. Holmes's legal team filed several appeals after the trial, but all were denied. He is currently serving his sentence in the Colorado State Penitentiary. The Aurora shooting was one of the deadliest mass shootings in American history, and it led to renewed debate about gun control laws in the United States. The incident also led to increased security measures in movie theaters, including metal detectors and increased police presence. Martin Bryant. The Port Arthur Massacre was a mass shooting that occurred in Port Arthur, Tasmania, Australia, on April 28, 1996. The shooter, Martin Bryant, a 28-year-old man with a history of intellectual disability, killed 35 people and injured 23 others using firearms. The incident began at the Broad Arrow Cafe located within the Port Arthur Historic Site, a popular tourist destination. Bryant first killed tourists and staff in the cafe with a semi-automatic rifle before moving on to other areas of the site, including a nearby guest house and a service station. He was eventually arrested by police after a siege that lasted for several hours. He was later convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bryant pleaded guilty to 35 murders and 23 injuries in the Port Arthur Massacre. He was sentenced to life.
And he even acted it out, so I mean, at that point, it is what it is.
Life in prison for each murder, as well as an additional 1,652 years for wounding 23 people, shooting at 14 others with the intent to kill, 4 counts of theft of a motor vehicle, 3 counts of arson, and 1 count of kidnapping. Bryant's trial began on November 11, 1996, and he pleaded not guilty to all charges. However, the prosecution presented significant evidence against him, including eyewitness testimony, physical evidence, and Bryant's confession to the police. The jury found Bryant guilty of all charges. Bryant is currently serving his sentence in Risdon Prison, a maximum security prison located in Hobart, Tasmania. He is not eligible for parole and will spend the rest of his life in prison. Since his imprisonment, Bryant has made several appeals to reduce his sentence, but all of them were rejected. He remains one of the most reviled criminals in Australian history. The incident was the deadliest mass shooting in Australian history, leading to significant changes in the country's gun laws. The government introduced stricter regulations on firearms ownership, including mandatory background checks, a 28-day waiting period for gun purchases, and a ban on certain types of semi-automatic rifles and shotguns. Additionally, a nationwide buyback program was implemented in which the government purchased and destroyed more than 600,000 firearms from private citizens. The Port Arthur massacre seriously impacted the Australian public and political landscape, significantly decreasing the number of mass shootings in the country. The event is still remembered and honored by the victims and the survivors, and it serves as a reminder of the importance of gun control in preventing mass shootings. Gary Ridgway. The Green River Killer is a serial killer who was active in the state of Washington in the United States during the 1980s and 1990s. He was responsible for the deaths of at least 71 women, mostly prostitutes.
Once again, what did these women do to you? Did you get burned or something? Like, did one of them send you to the clinic and you just spazzed out? "71 women. 71.
And runaways. His name comes from the location where the initial 5 victims were found in the Green River in Washington state. The Green River Killer's victims were typically young women, most of whom were prostitutes or runaways, who were killed and their bodies dumped in various locations around King County, Washington. The killings began in 1982, and the body of the first victim, Wendy Lee Caulfield, was found in the Green River on July 15th of that year. Over the next several years, more bodies were discovered in and around the Green River, and the police began to suspect that a serial killer was responsible for the deaths. The initial investigation was led by King County Sheriff's Office, but the case went cold for many years, despite massive efforts by law enforcement. In 2001, new DNA technology led to the identification of Gary Leon Ridgway as a suspect, and he was arrested in November of that year. Ridgway was charged with several counts of first-degree murder. In November 2003, Ridgway pleaded guilty to 48 counts of murder as part of a plea bargain agreement to avoid the death penalty. He also agreed to cooperate with authorities in the ongoing search for more victims and the locations of their remains. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He was given 49 life sentences and 480 years in prison. Ridgway's modus operandi was to target vulnerable women who were less likely to be reported missing and often disposed of the bodies in remote locations. He was also known for his ability to evade capture for so long, in part due to his habit of leaving little physical evidence at the crime scenes. He was also described as a chameleon who blended in with his surroundings and had a normal appearance and job. Ridgway's guilty plea and cooperation with authorities brought closure to many of the families of his victims, who had been waiting for justice for decades. However, the case also brought attention to the way society and law enforcement treated missing prostituted women, and how they were not taken as seriously as other missing persons cases. Nicholas Cruz. The Marjorie Stoneman, Douglas High School shooting occurred on February 14, 2018, in Parkland, Florida, United States. The perpetrator, Nicholas Cruz, was a 19-year-old former student at the school who had been expelled for disciplinary reasons. On the day of the shooting, Cruz entered the school armed with an AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle and multiple magazines of ammunition. He began shooting at students and teachers in the school's hallways and classrooms, killing 17 people and injuring 17 others. Cruz was initially able to flee the scene of the shooting, but was later arrested by local law enforcement. He was charged with 17 counts of premeditated murder and 17 counts of attempted murder. Cruz's defense attorneys initially considered an insanity defense, but later, Cruz pleaded guilty to all charges in order to avoid the death penalty.
Do these schools nowadays not have locks or something on the doors? I mean, I know mine did. Like, do y'all not have locks on y'all doors? How you just get in there? That's crazy. School should be more secure than what it is now.
During the trial, it was revealed that Cruz had a history of mental health issues and had been receiving treatment for depression and autism. He had also been expelled from the school for disciplinary reasons and had a history of violent and disturbing behavior. Furthermore, law enforcement and school officials had received multiple warnings about Cruz's potential for violence, but no action was taken to prevent the shooting.
You was warned and no one did anything about it. What do you expect? That's crazy. Nothing about it.
Howard County Sheriff's Office was widely chastised for its handling of the police response, both for failing to follow up on multiple warnings about Cruz, despite a long history of threatening behavior, and for remaining outside the school rather than confronting him. Several police officers who responded to the scene resigned as a result, and Sheriff Scott Israel was fired. A commission appointed by then-Governor Scott to investigate the shooting condemned police inaction and urged school districts across the state to implement more robust security measures. Cruz pleaded guilty to all charges and apologized for his crimes on October 20, 2021. The prosecution sought the death penalty, and a 4-month trial was scheduled to begin in January 2022. The trial started on July 18, 2022, after numerous delays, including those caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. On October 13, 2022, a jury unanimously agreed that Cruz was eligible for the death penalty, but disagreed on whether it should be imposed. This resulted in a recommendation to sentence him to life in prison, with no chance of parole. On November 2, 2022, Cruz was sentenced to 34 consecutive life sentences, 17 without the possibility of parole. He also received a minimum of 380 years of imprisonment. The shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School was one of the deadliest school shootings in United States history and sparked a nationwide debate about gun control and school safety. The shooting...
I really want to know what clicks in their mind, anybody's mind, to just want to do some gruesome stuff like that. It definitely the last one. Y'all was warned. You was warned that he was probably going to do something. And no action was took. I mean, what do you expect? Like, that's crazy. Appreciate y'all for watching the video. Like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to hit that post notification bell and turn it on to all so you won't miss another video. I'm out. Peace.